Welcome back to our Living the City double feature lecture series here in the exhibition in the former Tempelhof Airport. Living the City is an exhibition, it's a publication, it's also a program of events and a discursive platform about cities, people and stories. The setup always is the same. I have two guests with me and we have 60 minutes for conversation. Both of them will give a brief presentation of about 10 minutes and then we'll enter a little question and answer session together. Together with me are Xiaofu Wang, a photographer based here in Berlin, originally from Australia, and Kamil Bembnista, a filmmaker and sociologist. I believe a red thread in our conversation today will be like spaces and places of arrival and of migration. Thank you for being with us. I will start by introducing you, Xiaofu. We met I think maybe 1.5 years ago in the preparation of this exhibition, together with your colleague and friend Claude Somot. And this was when we were researching projects for the exhibition and came across the project We Are City Plaza, which we are involved and which we'll also talk about. And we had a meeting, I believe, in my studio at Moritzplatz, and kind of you guys kind of presented the ideas and came through it. So I'm very happy that you are joining us here today.
Likewise.
I briefly said you are from Australia. You have a background in communications originally. Studied that in Sydney. Now you're studying here in Berlin at the Ostkreuz School for Photography. Interesting enough, one of our main photographers, Jörg Brüggemann, who did most of the pictures or the photo essay for this exhibition. He's one of the key figures in that school. And you are focusing in your work on topics such as migration and religion and media and politics. And you're trying to explore this the intersection between the collective and the personal experience of such. The City Plaza Hotel you will talk about very briefly. Said it's kind of roughly behind me in the exhibition is a former hotel in the center of Athens that was vacant for many years and was then more or less occupied and transformed, or the 126 rooms were transformed into a place of first arrival for refugees from Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, I believe. That's it for the introduction. The screen is yours now.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Lucas. Sorry, do I get the thing for the presentation?
You definitely get the clicker.
Yes.
In just a second.
Great. Thanks a lot. Right, so I'm just going to jump right in with the story of how I got to City Plaza and how the project developed. In January 2017, I went on a short trip to Athens. I'd been talking to a family friend on the phone who told me that we were living through a major historical event in Europe. What he was referring to, of course, was the European migrant crisis, which had reached its peak in 2015, when over 1 million asylum seekers arrived on European shores. It was the biggest mass migration since the Second World War, caused by ongoing wars and conflicts in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, not to mention others. The news was inundated with images of people in rubber dinghies trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea, and long lines of people walking through the Balkan countryside, clashing with police at border crossings. Around 80% of those arriving came by boat from Turkey, and Greece was their first point of entry into Europe. Downtown Athens was chaotic and crumbling apart. There were people sleeping in almost every park and metro station. And the sudden influx of people, as well as the almost 8 years of economic crisis that the country had gone through, had left a visible mark on the streets. On my third day in Athens, I met Claude Somot through a mutual friend. That's Claude right there. He's a French photographer and school teacher who had traveled through the Balkans on a photo trip. After chatting for a couple of minutes, he asked me if I want to go to a squatted refugee hotel. Why not, I say, and half an hour later, we arrive at City Plaza Hotel. As soon as we walk through the double doors, we're stopped by two people sitting at a desk on the other side. They ask us why we're there. A friend said that you guys could do with some help, said Claude, and we're escorted into the giant commercial kitchen of the hotel. That day, the kitchen had been commandeered by a Spanish anarchist chef and a ragtag team of helpers who were on their kitchen shifts. Claude and I are handed a knife and some onions, which we spend the next 2 hours chopping. That afternoon, we agreed to meet again in a month's time to do a photography project at City Plaza. That place is amazing, Claude keeps on saying with a bewildered expression on his face. I agree with him wholeheartedly. I'd never been anywhere like it. He suggests that we give the kids some cheap cameras and teach them how to take photos. As a teacher, he has a natural aptitude for dealing with kids. And besides, he adds, kids are short. The perspective is going to be amazing. After collecting dozens of donated cameras, we come back in February and spend 2 weeks at City Plaza. These 2 weeks were intense, to say the least. We don't so much teach the kids as manage to administrate the cameras. Claude was responsible for distributing them, and as soon as he stepped into the hotel, he was pretty much rushed by a mob of kids pleading to have a camera. Let me tell you a bit about City Plaza. The hotel is located in the downtown Athenian suburb of Victoria. In 2016, it was squatted by a group of refugees and Greek leftist activists as both a political maneuver as well as a pragmatic effort to house refugees who were either living on the streets or in overcrowded camps. The building itself has around 90 rooms and the capacity to house 400 people. That is, with whole families sharing a single room. Many of the refugees living there had escaped war or poverty, and others were just looking for a better life in Europe. Around an eighth of the people living there were also international volunteers, mainly from Europe. And add to that, a dozen or so Greek activists. In the common spaces of City Plaza, the reception area, the bar, and the dining room, I saw some very unexpected social interactions. There were Mohawks, anarchists, eating dinner with women who wore hijabs, young Europeans drinking coffee with old Syrians, kids from different countries playing together, using broken English and bits and pieces of each other's language to communicate. Over the course of a year, Claude and I went back several times to City Plaza, collecting photos from kids and eventually also adults. We spent many of our days in our photo studio, which we shared part-time with the English teachers, or running to and from the analog film shop Skiadopolis, and our beloved print shop around the corner, where we made prints for people who'd had their photo taken. There was always a lot going on at City Plaza. Under the motto of we live together, we eat together, and we fight together, an informal infrastructure emerged which provided basic amenities for the residents, as many of them did not have access through more conventional means. There was a school, a medical center, a hairdresser, a kids' space, a women's space, as well as a variety of activities on offer depending on who was passing through. Conflict was also a daily occurrence at the hotel. There were misunderstandings because of language, differences in culture, or even ideology. Once, a feminist intervention led by a group of volunteer and refugee women resulted in the public shaming of a dozen men. As you can probably imagine, this didn't go down well. Egos were bruised, and a stink descended upon the building, which didn't go away for at least a week. The utopian ideals of the political project also clashed with the realities of keeping a place with 400 people running. And fights were had over things as banal as washing detergent. One of the core mottos of City Plaza was that it was collectively run. However, this didn't always extend to decision-making. And over time, many refugees and volunteers alike felt powerless to change things. In the middle of 2018, it was decided that City Plaza would be closed. The main reasons cited for the decision were the political shift to the right that was happening in Greece, as well as the looming threat of eviction and legal action that had been hanging over the project for some time. When City Plaza Hotel closed its doors in July 2019, it was a bittersweet moment for residents of the hotel. Some were exhausted by the internal politics of the project and were happy to move on, while others were devastated to lose their homes and community in one go. For many, it was also a massive struggle to find an affordable place to live, and some even went back to camps. 2 years after the closing of City Plaza, some of its residents have moved into a rented apartment building in a nearby suburb, while others have managed to settle elsewhere in Greece or in other European countries. Although the physical building has now been repossessed by its owner, the City Plaza community is still connected and very much alive. Around 40 former residents live in Berlin alone. The We Are City Plaza photo archive contains around 15,000 still images taken by over 80 photographers. It captures moments of day-to-day life at the hotel, which range from the banal to the totally outrageous, and stands as a collective bearing of witness to this very unique and experimental place. In the last few years, we've also collected some of the residents' stories, but there are many more which are yet to be told, and others yet which are still unfolding. Thank you very much.
Xiafu, thank you so much. Actually, a beautiful narrative. Also, thank you for this. And talking about a beautiful narrative, in connection to this exhibition, it's called an exhibition about cities, people, and stories. So we very deliberately took a narrative approach that we want to tell stories, much more than kind of giving facts about how cities are made or used or remade, but rather tell stories that are kind of engaged in the audience. And I think that's something that will be relevant for both of you, because you're a photographer, you're a filmmaker, but you narrate, you tell stories with your work. And for the City Plaza Hotel, I think you put it quite nicely. It was somewhere in between like utopia and reality, and the constant kind of conflict and consensus kind of friction that was there.
Yeah.
But how was it, and this will be a question that I will also ask you, Kamil, afterwards, how was it for you to now arrive there again as a stranger? This is a place where a lot of strangers meet. Most of them have not met before. Now you're coming from Australia, but how were you perceived as a stranger coming, trying to document? It's a very intimate moment. I suppose you found a clever solution by offering the cameras to them, so that actually you're not really taking the pictures. But can you share a little bit more in detail how that was for you, what you learned in that process as a photographer?
Yeah, sure. So initially, when we arrived, it took us a while. It took a while before people sort of trusted us. So we had to spend a lot of time sort of hanging out in the collective in the communal spaces and talking to people before we approached them with the idea of giving them cameras. So yeah, it wasn't really an instantaneous process, as there were actually a lot of photographers and news crews even arriving at the hotel kind of regularly. And I think people kind of developed a bit of camera fatigue at a certain point. So, yeah, I guess another reason we wanted to do these workshops was so that we could get photos that were from the perspective of the people living there rather than from our perspective, because that would always be less interesting, in our opinion, since we didn't have as intimate a connection to the space as they did.
In that sense, I mean, and it's true, intimate is the word here. The pictures that we also show here, they're very intimate because you can tell they're shot in the moment without really an observer there, no? Or except for the kid that took the picture or the resident who took the picture. But and what have you learned now as a photographer in that moment of documentary making? This goes for both, like this of creating a memory, a remembrance of something, because this is a place that does not exist anymore. No, it's not just that you document something and that can be documented afterwards. But this is in our last discussion with Jennifer Axu and Lutz Henke, we spoke of lost spaces, places that are gone, that don't exist anymore. This is one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. How was that for you, understanding that you are creating a memory of something that will not be there anymore?
So at the time, I think we had a kind of limited ability to see into the future. We didn't know how long the project would be around for. So the intention was very much to capture the moment, and of course to create a document of the space. But yeah, it was more a kind of pragmatic effort to give people cameras more than anything, and we didn't go in with a very strong intention of what we were going to do.
Maybe as a transitional question that I start with you and then I move to you is, what did you notice? This is an exhibition about cities, about places, about spaces, no? Like the spatial dimension of things. And we talk about hotel in this case. What was your biggest learning and understanding how they started to organize or reorganize a given space?
Yeah, so what was interesting about City Plaza was it was a hotel for tourists until I think it was around 2008. So it had been empty for quite a long time before the Greek activists squatted it. And it really got repurposed constantly. It was a constant process where different rooms were used for completely different purposes to what the initial intention was for the room. So like a hotel room with 2 beds was used for a family of 5. And on the 7th floor where we had our studio, that was also an English classroom. So we would, before we set up the background, we would move away the tables in order to create space in this classroom. And sometimes, I think I also slept there one night when I couldn't get home in time. So the space in the hotel was just constantly transforming. And that was really interesting to me.
And this is the key to you now, Kamil, because you're looking into, thank you, Xiafu, you're looking into refigurations of spaces very much in your work. To quickly introduce you, Kamil Bembnista is a filmmaker and a sociologist. The connection that we meet for the first time today was actually via Frederick Eil, one of the co-curators of this exhibition. And he has been in touch with some of your colleagues, I think, from the TU Berlin originally, also during the running time of the exhibition. And Philipp Mieselwitz of the Habitat Unity was also one of the lecturers here in the double feature series. So there's many or multiple overlaps content-wise and people-wise. So I said you're a filmmaker and a sociologist. You said that you kind of use film as a means of scientific dissemination, that's how you call it, and at the same time you try to use the film to kind of unfold space-related stories in your works. You are currently a research associate at the Architecture and Urban Planning Department at the Technical University in Cottbus. and as well at the Collaborative Research Center Re-Figuration of Space at the Technischen Universität in Berlin. The connection that we made was through a film that you're currently working on or have been working on the temporary homes. These are temporary homes for refugees or newly arrived, which was a result, and this is maybe contextualizing a little bit where we're sitting. We're sitting in the former Tempelhof Airport, but between, I think, 2015 and 18, one of the unused hangars right next to us was used as an emergency accommodation for, I think, a total of 32,000 newly arrived or refugees, of which 1/3 were children. And this eventually was also very critically observed, led to the creation of these temporary homes, which is the focus of one of your projects. So now I said enough. Kamil, thank you for being here, and the screen is now yours.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation and for the nice introduction, and congratulations for the really nice bridge you made with the questions. I really like it, and yeah, let me jump in immediately and ask, can I ask you for this one? Thank you. Oh, I go back and spoil a little bit. Yeah, so I would like to present two of my film works I did in this very city, as Lukas was mentioning, so in Berlin, and actually one of them partly has been made just in front of this building here we are sitting in, and it was a short documentary with the title Tempo Home, and this was my first film I did. I started 2.5 years ago, and this is about life in a waiting room situation, let's say, and how people who live in it cope with it. So this is like Lukas was introducing a container village for refugees, and it's called Tempo Homes, and it was closed in the year 2019, and people were moved to other Tempo Homes in Berlin. So also Tempo Homes is like a Berlin phenomenon. It's just like these container cities are just here to be found in Berlin. And so they were moved from here to, for example, Neukölln. This is where we shot the second documentary film. I will start to talk because it fits a little bit more, but I will also talk about the other one. So, and when I say we shot there, it is me and Ayham Dalal and our crew, of course. And yeah, I could say it's like a scientific documentary film. It's called 13 Square Meters. And yeah, I will start with this one. And I chose here, like in a classical way, like also like a subtitle, Architecture for the Appropriation of Space. And this is one of the main phenomena we could observe actually in both of these films. So people have the urge to inhabit and appropriate the space they're moving into, and thereby become architects of their new, let's say, environment and home. And as I learned when I started the project, also to dwell is to be. This is something the German philosopher Heidegger is saying, and so the practice of homemaking is it shapes your identity, you could say. So, but we can all imagine that this creative process is rather limited in a refugee camp, with limited resources and a lot of regulations going on there. So I wasn't an expert in these things before. I learned a lot of during this whole topic while shooting, but also from my colleague Ayham Dalal. And Ayham is a scholar and an architect who wrote his PhD actually about practices of appropriation from refugees in the Azraq camp in Jordan. And yeah, we both met in the Technical University and at this collaborative research center, Re-Figuration of Space. I have a little, let's say, sketch here of how this Tempo Homes are looking, but I will go to this in a second. So we met. So Ayham and me met there at this collaborative research center, and I went there with my dissertation as a associated fellow, and so I was making this movie about the first one, Tempo Home, and he was actually researching on this topic on Tempo Homes. So we just said, okay, let's combine our forces and let's ask for money and do a film. And there we go. So the grumpy one is me, and the happy one is Iham. And in the rear you can see one of our DOPs. So yeah, we had a lot of good time, but it was also when we were shooting, it was 2020, and of course this had some difficulties, as you can imagine. Yeah, but I will also come back to this one. So before, I would like to briefly introduce you to what Tempo Homes are actually. So they are run by the Landesamt für Flüchtlingsangelegenheiten, so the Administration for Refugee Affairs, and the containers are provided by the Berlin Real Estate Management, and there are also social services going on there in the Tempo Homes, like social workers and facility management and things like this. So you can tell there are a lot of institutions involved, and you can also tell that this has as a consequence that there are a lot of policies, a lot of regulations and things like this. So yeah, and let me go back here. So you can see this container here on the left, and on the right hand side there are like living units, and each living unit has 13 square meters. So this is the title of our film, and it's either like used by a family or by two strangers, so they have to cope with each other, and this is of course a privacy issue. Shooting in 2020, so there were some issues, of course. Corona is one of them, and so at first we had no access to this field, let's say. So we asked actually something similar as I learned just from Xiaofu, that so we asked also residents there, also kids, to take cameras or like their cell phones and to record what is going on there, but it didn't work out at all. So we were very very happy to be allowed to film there and follow our path, and this was due to the help of the camp management. So on the other hand, it was also, refugees are building things there. So as you can see there, right close to the head of the left guy, there is an air conditioner built by the refugees, and it was super hot in last summer. And this is something they are not really allowed to do, but it is tolerated by the camp management. And this is also, so there is a lot of negotiation going on between the refugees and the camp management. But on the other hand, there was also negotiations going on between us as a film team and the camp management, because we wanted actually to shoot this refiguration of spaces. So it was not really, we had to negotiate to get this material also, and we finally got it, so this was very good. And and also the privacy issue. So so there are a lot of women also at these camps, but none of them. So I learned this from both of the projects I was doing. So none of the women, except one, was ready to talk with us, and they were hiding somehow. But it was very hot, so they had to leave the doors open, and it was kind of challenging actually. So they said, okay, so please don't film me, but some did, and it was very, very nice of them. And without their cooperation and their resilience, it wouldn't be possible to shoot this film. Okay, I actually wanted now to, it's here, right? Show how do I do this here? The trailer?
Click on it again, it should start.
Yeah.
البيت عنا تقريبا 220 متر. بيت كبير، الله الكبير طبعا.
Pro Zimmer sind ungefähr 13 Quadratmeter für 2 Personen.
Soleil, espace, verdure. The house is a machine for living.
ممنوع هون تحط جلايل، واللي بيحط جلالة بيقولوا له إنه لازم تقيمة.
Es ist für uns schwer, weil wir ja niemand sind, der anderen Menschen erzählen soll, wie sie leben. Wir müssen es aber.
Yeah, so one of the conclusions of this film is that refugees, despite of all restrictions and regulations they have to face in their situation, they will always resist and adapt to the situation. And they start to become the architects of their surroundings and of their lives. So, but the question is also what we can learn also. And when we formulate this as a question is, so how can we actually better dwell? And how can we provide better infrastructure to let people live, to be their own architects, to resist better and to dwell? So, because as I mentioned before, so there are a lot of regulations going on. You cannot move out the furniture, for example. So you have to live with the things there are. So. Yeah, having said a lot about the perspective of space, I will now shortly introduce you to my other film project, Tempo Home, where the notion of time is rather dominant. And this film was funded by the Polish Film Institute. I was studying in Warsaw film, so it's rather a classical documentary about 3 protagonists. They live at the Tempelhofer Feld, and each of them had their own original story. I mean, there were like over 1,000 people living there, and it was kind of challenging also to fight the right ones and to tell a story. And here we have the story of like 3 people like living in the waiting room and trying to cope with this. And so I think I will just let you go through it. It's this is Layla, and she's a mother of 2 children, and she came from Lebanon, and she left her husband there, and tried to cope with the situation, try to get asylum, and she tries also to bring her husband here, but it's kind of difficult because he tried once and he got depressed, and they try to raise their children via digital devices right now. So this is their family concept. We have a young fellow here called Bakir. He has to face deportation. And he's here from Iraq, just 1 month, and And then we have we don't see him too good here, but it's Amir. Amir really believes not in administration, but in his own path, and this is he actually wants to. Find his own ways and omit the administrative path to take his children and his whole family to Germany. And he came here by bike, so from Greece to Germany by bike. So he has a lot of interesting things to say. This is Layla. And maybe we can talk about the outlook in a second. I would just want to thank these guys I was working with. We can see here. So thank you.
Thank you, Kamil. No? I mean, please, you can straight go to the outlook, so to speak, before I ask another question.
Yeah.
What the outlook for you has been, again, similar question that I asked to you, Xiaofu, like arriving nonetheless for a short period of time, whether you're there for 2 weeks or 2 months, but it's it's a minute, so to speak, in the lives of these people. What's the outlook?
You mean, yeah. This is something I tried to say before. Also, I mean, we see that people will move on. So people don't just adapt to the situation by don't doing anything. So people will always try to make the situation better for them, and that's why they came here. So. And so the question is if it's really the best idea to provide furniture, for example, they cannot bring out, and so the idea is, or the question is, why not let them be the architects more, and kind of reflect on the methods and on the on the infrastructure you provide for them.
Yeah, in many ways, for me, seeing this now, also hearing you before, you both, there are also like micro case studies that represent something that is also happening on the macro scale, on the scale of the city. In a way, this is what we're trying to address in this exhibition as well, that there are rules, there's certain forms that are given, but you can still intervene, appropriate and proactively change the environment that you inhabit, that you live in, that you dwell in. So these, I think, the 50 projects that we're showing in this exhibition, they come from art and architecture and city planning and civil society and politics. They're all about that moment of kind of, negotiating the given. No? And that's something that you described, that the space is constantly transforming. I think you called it, or like a permanently repurposed space. And you also called it the urge to inhabit and appropriate. And you called it the practice of homemaking, and I think that's maybe a key thing. Maybe you can dwell literally speaking, a little bit more on the homemaking, because that is such a key moment. No, like what constitutes a home? How can you make it a home? And how is it actually basically made impossible by, let's say, not moving the furniture, or again in the macro scale, there's certain things in the city.
Yeah, I mean, so we can see here, so there are a lot of regulations in this camp. So for example, you cannot put a nail into the wall, or you cannot hang, so originally you couldn't hang covers on the windows. So, and this was of course a problem of privacy, also for women who wanted to, unfold their headscarves, for example. And people have to, have to cope with these issues. As I said, I mean the practice of homemaking is essential actually for us. I mean, every one of us who tries to live in a new environment somehow has to make it cozy and something for herself or himself. So and this is actually crucial, that you can remove things, for example, or add things. And so, like one of the ladies in the trailer also said, so from the camp management is so the things that are provided there is like for a German way of life. But people, for example, sleep on the floor, and when you just have 13 square meters and it's full of furniture and you cannot bring out, so it's a problem. I mean, it's so you have to do something with this, so to feel in a good environment. So, and this is the question: if you want to provide this, if you want to let the people feel like home or not, so, or is it just about temporary housing? So, right.
Sounds like a pretty schizophrenic situation.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Anything to add to that, Xiaofu? I mean, the City Plaza was much more. I mean, it was a occupied house from the beginning, so there were not as many regulations. Though you said that at one point, in a way, it also stopped working as a project because people had the feeling that it couldn't intervene anymore, despite being a collectively run project. So what was the story there?
Yeah, so despite being a collectively run project, there were, or maybe because it was a collectively run project, there were actually a lot of rules all the time about, what people could do, what kind of, how they could eat. For example, like people weren't allowed to make food in their rooms for safety reasons, because having a live stove in a room with carpet is very dangerous. So that's understandable. But a lot of people didn't want to eat in the dining area. They didn't like the food necessarily. So that was kind of a point of conflict for people. And yeah, there were other rules which I guess were a bit arbitrarily applied. So the rules would apply to some people and not to others, or there was no one to make sure that the people were following the rules. So yeah, I guess basically the lack of like a formal authority actually produced other forms of authority that were more informal. So even though it was a leftist project, there was still a lot of rules and restrictions on the people which they didn't like.
Super fascinating phenomenon, no? Formal authority and informal authorities, but they still kind of coexist, and somehow they come to the fore eventually at one point. Formal and informal. Another question, maybe more directed to you, but maybe also for the two of you, because you're a sociologist by training, but a filmmaker. So you live in also this kind of schizophrenic condition or dialectic condition of doing artistic work, artistic research, let's say, but at the same time you doing that in an academic context. They're now picking up the rules and regulation within the academic context. They're very clear rules, they're very clear regulations on how to work. It's slowly, opening up a little bit, but generally speaking, the artistic world and the academic world are often very much polar opposites in their working methods. How are you able to combine these two?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, actually, and I couldn't manage for many years. So I had like this, I mean, it's not hybrid, it's like very separated identity, let's say. So I was interested in both, but I could see that in both there are similar methods, for example, to approach people, So if you want to do an interview, a qualitative interview for sociology aspects, then, I mean, you still have to approach people and tell your story somehow, why you want to do this and things like this, and the same applies for filmmaking. So why you want to, so you have to convince the people you're approaching. But on the other hand, it's and what I actually also like a lot about filmmaking is it's always kind of biographical driven. So for example, when I approached the people at the refugee camp, so I mean, I couldn't speak Arabic, and most of the people did there. So I still had to offer them my story, so that my family from Poland came to Germany, and we also, or rather, my father lived also in a kind of refugee camp. So I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do that in a sociology setting, but I kind of learned that this is also helping. So I can see that I can use both to improve my the way I approach people, for example, or my methods, let's say, right? So yeah, but I agree. It's very it's actually challenging because also the two disciplines don't really accept each other, but it's coming. I think it's becoming better. So.
How about you, Xiaofu? You're not like classically in this kind of academic research context, but nonetheless I was interested because you describe in your own work that you're interested in individual and collective experiences as a photographer. Is this something that started after having worked with and in the Hotel City Plaza, or was it there from the beginning? Because what you named the collective and individual experience is exactly that friction, that tension that happened that you described with the informal authorities, the collective experience, the individual. But has this been something that you were inspired by your experience in Athens, or was this already a topic beforehand?
So I think while I was in Athens, it was an interest of mine already from before I went there. But while I was in Athens, kind of trying to see what was unfolding on a massive scale for myself, I realized that people's lives and their experiences are kind of parts of a whole. So when we look at the European migrant crisis, as it's been called, it's a massive experience for millions, or more than a million people. And yet there are similarities between different people's individual experiences. So I'm interested in the intersection of those two things. And one of my favorite authors, Svetlana Alexievich, is a Belarusian oral historian who's collected a lot of stories about different topics. But yeah, I guess she's probably one of my biggest inspirations for this project, in that it's she kind of brings together different voices to collectively tell a story, but maintaining elements of their individual and unique experiences.
Which reminds me of that one of the inhabitants of the city Plaza also wrote a book herself that was presented at the last Documenta, I believe, from the experiences in Athens.
Right.
I was now connecting this again to sociology and filmmaking. Obviously, in sociology, if you focus on urban sociology, you look at like spaces and places and cities and their role for the constitution of society in a way. And the connection that I thought of when preparing for our conversation is that there is this weird phenomena of an intersection between the beginning of film and filmmaking and cities, or so basically the first big metropolises go hand in hand with the very first films ever made. You know, if you think of the man with the camera, Vertov, or Ruttmann's like Symphony of a Metropolis, or even the Mies brothers, the workers leaving the factory. It's always in a kind of fresh urban context, which was a very new phenomenon at the time. Is this something that you have reflected upon as a filmmaker and somehow a sociologist that deals with space and urban spaces?
Yeah, I was so last time I was like thinking about this or reflecting with my editor, and we were thinking about, so is there a film who is not about space, for example? So because we were like saying, okay, because I told him I want this film to be more about space. Please, can you make something? Just do something about this. I want to highlight the notion of space more in my film, and. Yeah, we had some issues there. I mean, we got to a point, but his argumentation was, but everything is about the notion of space actually. So I mean, the fact that you put a camera on something, you place it in a space, and then you try to document something, and it wouldn't be possible without the surroundings, without the space, right? So. So I mean, I'm definitely I'm also, like, other films I did were also about like cross-border situations, for example, and this is something I'm really interested in. So, and I think with film, you can definitely. Or with visual media, also with photography, for example, it's the perfect way to kind of unfold the space-related stories. Either they are like narratives or also like scientific stories, let's say, right? So because just like text-based research on space is limited, you know.
Actually, right kind of behind this wall, which the audience can see, we have a little cinema where we show the work Homo Urbanus by Hilaire Becker and Louise Le Mans, like two filmmakers who work very closely with spaces or people inhabiting spaces, and they focus on the kind of everyday life of people living in different cities and what their routines are. And they are basically, in a way, sociological studies, you could say, no? The Homo Humanus project. Now, already looking at the watch, we are coming to an end of our 60 minutes, but I would like to talk to you both about the places or spaces that you grew up in and how they kind of influenced your outlook or perspective on the world and the way you approach spaces. I personally have come more and more to the understanding that how of like site-specific knowledges. Sometimes we don't realize how much we're influenced by the environments that we grew up in or different cities. You grew up in Sydney, I believe. I don't know, you mentioned that your family came from Poland, but you grew up here or there. But maybe you can both reflect on the site specificity of the places that you grew up in and how far they kind of modulated your look at the city and your interaction with the city. So whoever dares first goes first here. I feel there's a thought coming already.
So I grew up in Sydney, which in the suburbs, which has an inner city that's kind of actually very far from the geographical center of the city. And Sydney is just full of sprawling suburbs where people live in quite low density housing. So in houses or low apartment blocks with 4 stories or six stories. And I think, this is definitely shapes the way that people lead their lives there. It's very difficult to get around without a car, for example. Where I grew up, it took 20 minutes to walk to the nearest supermarket, and 5 minutes to drive. So, without a car, you lacked access to a lot of things. I also had to take a train for an hour to get to school, and also then a bus. Things were very spread out in Sydney, and that kind of had an influence on the way that I perceived space, for sure. Like, when I came to Berlin, I was amazed that you could get anywhere within about 45 minutes. Like, we didn't have that at all in Australia. You really had to take the time and to plan where you were going. Yeah.
Thank you, Xiaofu. How about you, Kamil? How far did the spaces of your growing up maybe influence your personal trajectory?
I really love this question actually, because I don't know if I reflected on this too much, but it really makes me think, and it's so a lot, I would say, because my parents moved to Poland when I was like about 2 years old, from Poland to Germany, to Hamburg actually. So I grew up in a big city, the second biggest in Germany, and I have like. Coming here like as a migrant in this migrant situation, so I would say I didn't have access like immediately because we didn't speak German just from the scratch. So there was no access to everything the city offered for us. But I learned to kind of grow up in this hybrid identity, let's say. So I think also, I don't know, I have the impression now that everything I'm interested in is like it's very this hybrid format of identity of spaces also. I mean, for my academic work, I work on borders, for example, and the fact that we crossed the borders when they were physically existing back then, it was it kind of. Of course, I think it did something. Of course, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't reflecting on this like too much, but this is definitely something, I would say. Yeah.
To share my 2 cents here, I grew up in Berlin, West Berlin, and so I was maybe 12 when the wall came down. And I believe, talking about borders, that this has been a very important experience also for me. The kind of the moment of transgression, or the transgressive moment of kind of borders falling. And it has surely impacted very much the way I look at the city and approach the city. Also the way Berlin had been transformed in these days and appropriated and reappropriated by basically everyone, which I think also in many ways translate into this exhibition on many levels. So more food for thought. You can reflect upon it, but I think there's much to gain from really thinking about thinking does not just occur, but it grows in certain sides, and it's interesting also autobiographically speaking to analyze that further. That said, we come to an end. I would like to thank both of you, Kamil, and thank you, Xiaofu, for joining us here at the double feature lecture series as part of Living the City. I would like to thank on behalf of the entire curatorial team, that's Tatjana Schneider, and that's the Green Isle, and me, Lukas Feireis, you, the audience, for being with us again. Please stay safe and see you soon. Bye-bye.